Black Waitress found 10 men kneeling at her father's grave. The billionaire CEO was repaying a debt. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It all started on a cool autumn morning in New Orleans, a city where the air was thick with history and the weight of centuries. At St. Louis Cemetery, one of the oldest and most prestigious burial grounds in the city, a scene was unfolding that no one could have anticipated. The cemetery, with its rows of ornate tombs and marble crypts, was a place where people came to honor their loved ones and pay their respects. But today, for one woman, it would be a moment that would change everything. Naomi Carter, a young black waitress, stood at the foot of her father's grave, feeling a deep sense of loss. She had always been close to her father, a man who had worked hard all his life to provide for his family, never asking for anything in return. His passing had left a hole in her heart, one that seemed impossible to fill. As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, she noticed something unusual. A group of 10 men, dressed in expensive suits, were kneeling at her father's grave. They weren't there for the usual reasons. No, they were kneeling, heads bowed in what seemed like an act of reverence. Naomi felt a knot form in her stomach. These men were not family. They weren't friends. So why were they here? Why were they honoring her father in such a way? As she approached, one of the men, an older man with salt and pepper hair, turned toward her. His face was filled with a mixture of guilt and respect. "We owe your father more than words can express," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. Naomi's mind raced. Who were these men? And why were they kneeling at the grave of a man who had lived a simple, hard-working life? What was going on here? The answer to those questions would come soon enough. But Naomi had no way of knowing that the man who had once been the most powerful CEO in the tech industry, Richard Kessler, was about to change her life forever. Richard Kessler, the billionaire CEO of Kessler Tech, was the man who had sent these men to kneel at her father's grave. His company had been built on hard work, yes, but also on secrets. And those secrets, as Naomi would soon learn, were tied to her father's legacy. As the rain began to fall, the men stood up, and Naomi finally stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The truth about her father's connection to this man would shake Naomi to her core and change her perception of everything she had ever known. Little did she know that the very man who had once overlooked her, and whose company had rejected her years earlier, was now standing before her in a moment of deep regret, ready to reveal a debt that had remained unpaid for years. The storm was just beginning, and Naomi's life was about to take an unexpected turn. Naomi stood there, frozen, as the men slowly rose to their feet, their heads still bowed in reverence. She looked at them one by one, their faces now visible in the soft glow of the afternoon light. They were well-dressed, their expensive suits contrasting sharply with the solemnity of the moment. She had no idea what was happening, but one thing was certain. These men were not here by coincidence. Her father had never been a man of wealth or fame. So why were they kneeling at his grave? Why were they showing such respect to someone who had lived a simple, quiet life? As the last of the men stood, the older man who had spoken to her earlier took a step forward. His eyes were filled with a mix of sorrow and gratitude, as if he had come to terms with something long buried. "I know this is confusing," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "But your father saved my life many years ago, and now, it's time for me to pay back that debt." Naomi blinked, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. Her father had saved this man's life? The thought seemed impossible, yet the sincerity in the man's voice made her pause. "How could that be?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded slowly, as if preparing to reveal something he had kept hidden for far too long. "Your father was a man of integrity," he continued. "Years ago, I was involved in a business deal that went terribly wrong. I was being blackmailed by powerful people, and it seemed like there was no way out. Your father, a man who had nothing to gain, stepped in without hesitation. He protected me, risked everything to help me get out of a situation that could have destroyed both of us." Naomi stood still, her mind racing. She had never heard of any such situation. Her father had never mentioned anything about this. But why didn't he ever tell me? She asked, her voice soft. The man's expression turned wistful, his gaze distant, as if he were remembering a time long past. He didn't want you to know, he said. He didn't want you to be burdened by the weight of what he had done. But he also made me promise to repay him someday, in a way that would honor his legacy. Naomi felt a knot tighten in her chest. This was all too much to take in. The quiet, humble man who had raised her, who had always put his family first, had been involved in something so much bigger than she could have ever imagined. But why are you here now? She asked, struggling to keep her emotions in check. The man looked at her with a sense of urgency in his eyes. Because, Naomi, your father's legacy lives on in you. He saved me, and now I need to make sure you're taken care of. We owe him that. Naomi was overwhelmed, unsure of how to process the flood of information. How could she even begin to understand the full extent of what her father had done? I don't need anything from you, she said, shaking her head. I don't want your charity or your pity, but I do want to know the truth. All of it. The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I understand, he said, and I'll tell you everything. At that moment, Naomi heard the sound of a car approaching from the main road. The sleek black limousine pulled up to the cemetery gate, its tinted windows reflecting the fading light of the day. The car stopped, and the door opened slowly. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit, his face sharp, his posture confident. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She knew who he was before he even spoke. Richard Kessler, the billionaire CEO who had built his empire on tech innovations and ruthless business deals. Naomi had never met him, but she had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. What was he doing here? Why was he stepping out of that limousine, walking toward her father's grave? Her pulse quickened, and a wave of confusion and suspicion washed over her. What connection did this man, this stranger, have to her father's past? Richard Kessler looked over at Naomi, his cold gaze briefly meeting hers before he turned to the group of men still gathered around the grave. You've done well, he said to them, his voice commanding. Naomi could feel the tension in the air. Who was this man? And why did it feel like he was the one controlling the situation, even though he wasn't the one kneeling at her father's grave? Kessler's eyes shifted back to Naomi, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something almost like guilt. He approached her slowly, his steps deliberate, as if weighing every move he made. Naomi, he said, his voice low but steady. I owe your father more than you could possibly understand. And now, I'm here to repay that debt. Naomi's mind spun with 1,000 questions. What kind of debt? And why was Richard Kessler, a man who had everything, standing here in front of her, making these cryptic promises? The truth was out there. She knew it. But the pieces were still scattered, and Naomi was determined to put them together, no matter how much it hurt. Naomi stood motionless, her mind racing as Richard Kessler approached her. The air around them felt thick with uncertainty. Each step he took seemed to echo in the stillness of the cemetery. She had never been in a situation like this before, never expected to find herself face to face with one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world, standing on the ground where her father was buried. The words he spoke barely registered at first, but the weight of them began to sink in slowly. I owe your father more than you can understand, he said again, his voice quieter this time, almost apologetic. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted answers, she needed them, but the more she tried to piece things together, the more complicated the picture became. What debt? She finally asked, her voice shaking with the rawness of the moment. Kessler's eyes softened, and for the first time, Naomi saw something human in his usually cold, calculating expression. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO anymore. He was a man burdened with the weight of a promise, a debt to a man who had saved his life. Kessler took a slow breath, his gaze drifting to the grave before turning back to Naomi. Your father, he started, his voice steady but tinged with regret. He saved my company, my legacy. I would not be here today without him. Naomi's confusion deepened. My father didn't save anyone, she said, her voice growing stronger, though she could feel the doubt creeping in. Kessler nodded solemnly. He did, he said quietly. It was years ago. I was at a crossroads. My company was on the brink of bankruptcy. I had enemies in high places, people who wanted to ruin me, to destroy everything I had worked for. Your father, He stepped in when no one else would. Naomi's mind struggled to catch up. Her father, a simple man who had spent his life working at a local mechanic shop, had saved a billionaire's company? The thought seemed impossible. But Kessler's sincerity, the way he spoke, made her pause. He didn't just save me financially, Kessler continued, his eyes fixed on the grave. He protected me. He kept a secret that could have ruined him. And he did it without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. That's why I'm here. I owe him my life, Naomi. I owe him everything. Naomi's chest tightened. The pieces of her father's life that she had never known, the quiet sacrifices he had made. Suddenly, they were all coming into focus. But the bigger question remained. Why had her father kept this secret? Why hadn't he ever told her about the man standing before her? The man whose wealth and power had been saved by a single act of kindness from a mechanic in New Orleans. Naomi felt her hands tremble as she tried to make sense of the chaos swirling in her mind. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to think that her father had been involved in something so much bigger than her. But the truth was staring her in the face, and there was no denying it. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice sharp, but beneath the anger, there was a layer of fear she couldn't hide. Kessler looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I don't want anything from you," he said finally. "But I think your father would have wanted you to know the truth. And maybe, just maybe, this is a chance for you to understand what he really did for me, and for others." Naomi stood still, her mind still racing, her heart still unsure of what to believe. The man before her, the billionaire CEO, had just told her that her father had been a hero, but that didn't make any sense. Her father had always been humble, never seeking the spotlight, never expecting recognition. So why now? Why had Kessler come all the way to New Orleans to reveal this secret? The questions kept piling up, but one thing was clear. Naomi's life, her understanding of who her father was never going to be the same again. "I'm not sure I believe you," she said quietly, almost to herself. Kessler nodded, as if he had expected that response. "I understand," he said. "But the truth doesn't change, no matter how hard it is to accept. Your father did something that no one else could have done. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. Now, it's time for me to repay him. It's time for me to honor his legacy." Naomi felt a chill run through her. She didn't know what that meant, but something in her gut told her that this was just the beginning. Her father's life was tied to a story she had never known, a story that was about to change her own life forever. She wasn't sure what Kessler meant by repaying the debt, but she knew she had to find out. As the rain continued to fall around them, Naomi felt a sense of determination building within her. She wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't going to let her father's legacy be forgotten. And whatever Kessler had planned, she would be there, watching, questioning, and uncovering the truth one step at a time. Naomi stood at the edge of the grave, her heart pounding, the air thick with the weight of Richard Kessler's words. She had always known her father was a man of integrity, but this revelation that he had saved a billionaire, a tech mogul, from the depths of ruin, was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. Her mind was still reeling from the truth, the years of mystery that now surrounded her father's legacy, and the man standing before her, claiming to owe him everything. As the rain fell softly around them, Naomi turned to Kessler, her eyes narrowing with a new sense of purpose. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind was a whirlwind. Kessler looked at her with a mix of determination and regret. "I told you before," he said slowly, "I don't want anything from you. But there's something I need you to understand. Your father didn't just save me from financial ruin. He saved me from losing myself, from becoming someone I never wanted to be. And I've spent the years since trying to repay him, trying to honor that debt in the only way I knew how. But now it's your turn. You deserve to know the truth, Naomi. You deserve to understand what he did and how it changed everything." Naomi stood still, processing his words. She had no idea what he meant by "your turn." But it was clear that whatever Kessler had in mind, it was more than just a gesture of gratitude. There was a deeper purpose, something larger than she could fathom. The man who had built an empire with ruthless business strategies was now standing before her, vulnerable and sincere, asking for her understanding. "I don't know if I can ever understand what my father did," Naomi said quietly, her voice wavering. "He was just a mechanic, a man who worked hard and took care of his family. He never wanted anything more than that. Why would he get involved with someone like you? Someone who is everything. Kessler's face softened, his expression pained. Because your father saw something in me that no one else did, he said, his voice raw with emotion. He saw a man who was desperate, who was willing to risk everything for a chance at redemption. And when no one else would help, he did. He put his trust in me when I didn't deserve it. And for that, I owe him everything. But I owe you the truth, too. Naomi's mind raced. Her father, the man who had always protected her from the harsh realities of the world, had been involved in something far bigger than she had ever known. The questions swirled in her mind. Why had he kept this from her? Why had he never shared this secret, this bond with Kessler? As if sensing her confusion, Kessler took a step closer, his tone more urgent. Naomi, the debt I'm talking about isn't just financial. It's a matter of legacy. Your father's legacy. And it's a legacy that needs to be honored. That's why I'm here. To make sure you understand what he did and why it matters now. Naomi's chest tightened as she looked at the billionaire standing before her, the man who had been a stranger to her until now, yet whose life had been so intertwined with her father's. She felt a surge of anger, frustration, and confusion. How had her father gotten caught up in this world of wealth and power? Why had he chosen to help a man like Kessler, a man who seemed to have everything, while her father had nothing but his pride and his family? I don't know if I can forgive him for keeping this from me, Naomi whispered, her eyes downcast. I don't know if I can forgive you for making me part of this story now. Kessler's gaze never wavered. I didn't want to drag you into this, he said softly. But now that you know the truth, you have a choice. You can walk away and forget all of this. Or you can choose to understand what it means to carry on your father's legacy, to live up to the example he set. Because whether you want to or not, Naomi, you're a part of this now. And you have a role to play in the story that's yet to be told. Naomi looked at Kessler, her mind spinning, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't know what to believe, what to do. She had always known that her father was a good man, a man who would help anyone in need, but she had never imagined the depths of his involvement in this world of wealth and power. The pieces were starting to come together, but there was still so much left unanswered. She had more questions than ever, but one thing was clear: her life, her understanding of who her father was, would never be the same again. What do you want me to do? Naomi finally asked, her voice steady but unsure. Kessler's expression softened. I need you to understand, he said quietly. I need you to understand that your father's actions were not just about saving me. They were about something much bigger, something that has the power to change everything. And I need you to carry that forward, Naomi. For your father, for your family, and for the future. Naomi looked at Kessler, the storm still raging in the distance. But in that moment, she knew her life had shifted. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew that she couldn't turn back. The truth was out there, and now, it was her turn to find it. Naomi's mind was still reeling from Richard Kessler's words. He had laid it all out for her. The truth about her father, the connection between them, and the debt that had been owed and repaid. But the more she thought about it, the more questions kept surfacing, like an ocean of unanswered doubts. Why hadn't her father told her any of this? Why did he keep it all hidden? It didn't make sense, but one thing was clear: Naomi's life was never going to be the same again. She couldn't just go back to her quiet existence, working shifts at the diner, living day by day. No, she had a role to play now. Kessler had said it himself. She was a part of a much larger story. The question was, what part? She sat at her small kitchen table, the weight of her father's secret pressing on her chest, the sound of the rain still tapping against the windows. Outside, the world was washed in gray, the storm still lingering in the distance. Naomi stared at the half-empty coffee cup in front of her, barely tasting it. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Her father had always been a man of few words. He had raised her with love and discipline, but never spoke of anything beyond the essentials. He had kept his past hidden, locked away like a well-kept secret. But now, that secret was out. Naomi's mind kept returning to one central question. Why had he never shared this with her? Why had he kept it from her for all these years? It wasn't just about the debt. It was about the man her father had been, a man who had done something extraordinary, something she had never known about until now. She didn't know how to feel about it. There was pride, of course. Her father had been a hero in his own quiet way, a man who had saved a billionaire's life. But there was also anger. Anger that he hadn't trusted her with this, that he had kept it hidden from her for so long. Naomi's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She looked down at the screen, half expecting it to be Kessler again, but instead, it was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, her heart skipping a beat. It was a picture of her father, standing next to a man she didn't recognize. The man was tall, with dark hair and a stern expression, dressed in a suit that was clearly expensive. The message read, "Your father saved my life. I'm sorry you never knew." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Who was this man? And why was he sending her this? Her fingers hovered over the phone, unsure of what to do next. The man in the photo didn't look like anyone she had ever seen before, and the idea that her father had been involved with people like him, wealthy, powerful people, was still difficult to comprehend. But Naomi knew one thing for sure. She couldn't ignore this. She couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. She had to know the truth. She dialed the number and waited as the phone rang. It took a moment before a deep voice answered. "Naomi Carter," the man said, his voice low but steady. "Yes," she replied, her heart racing. "Who are you?" The man hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "I'm Ethan Monroe," he said, his voice softer now. "And I owe your father everything." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. Ethan Monroe? The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. "How do you know my father?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke. "Your father didn't just save Richard Kessler," he said. "He saved me, too. I owe him more than I could ever repay." Naomi's mind raced. Ethan Monroe, another name tied to her father's secret past. How many more people were out there? People her father had helped? People who owed him something? She didn't know what to think, what to feel. The truth was unraveling before her, and it was far bigger than she had ever imagined. Ethan Monroe's voice broke through her thoughts. "I'm sure this is a lot to take in," he said gently. "But I want you to know that your father's actions were more important than you'll ever know. He made choices that affected the lives of many people. And you need to understand that the man he wasn't just the father you knew. He was a man who changed lives." Naomi felt the weight of his words. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain. She was on the brink of discovering something that would alter everything she thought she knew about her father, about herself, and about the life she had been living. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I want to know the truth," she said firmly. "All of it." Ethan Monroe was silent for a moment, then responded, "I'll tell you everything. But first, you need to understand that this goes much deeper than you can imagine. There are people who will try to stop you from learning this, Naomi. People who want to keep the truth hidden. But if you're ready, I'll show you the way." Naomi stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. She was ready to uncover the truth, to find out who her father really was, and what his legacy truly meant. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew it was a path she had to take. Naomi could feel her heart racing as she hung up the phone with Ethan Monroe. The truth, as much as she wanted to deny it, was becoming more real with every word spoken. Her father's secret life, his connections to powerful men, the debts he had accrued, it was all unraveling. And now, Ethan was offering to tell her everything, but there was a catch. She had to be ready to hear it. The thought of her father being so deeply involved in a world of wealth and power that she had never known was overwhelming. She had always seen him as just her father, the man who had raised her with love and humility, a man who had never sought recognition. Yet, now it was clear that he had played a part in something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Naomi knew there was no turning back. She had already taken the first step down this path by speaking with Kessler and Ethan, and now there was no way to stop the tide of truth that was coming. But what did it all mean? What was the debt that had been paid, and why had it been kept hidden from her? She couldn't sit still any longer. Her thoughts were too chaotic, the questions too pressing. She needed to know more. Naomi quickly grabbed her coat and stepped outside into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The city was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay in her apartment any longer. She had to clear her head. As she walked down the sidewalk, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty streets. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Kessler. "We need to meet. There's more to tell you." Her stomach twisted. She had already heard so much, yet she knew there was more. Kessler had promised her the truth. But what if the truth was too much to bear? What if her father's actions, the sacrifices he had made, had put her in danger? Naomi felt the weight of the decision before her. She could turn back, forget all of this, and go on living the life she had always known. But she knew deep down that she couldn't. The questions were too big, and the answers too elusive. She needed to know the truth, no matter what it cost her. With determination setting in, Naomi typed out a quick response to Kessler. "I'm on my way. Where do you want to meet?" It didn't take long before Kessler replied, sending her the address of a small, private office in downtown New Orleans. Naomi didn't hesitate. She hailed a cab and soon found herself standing in front of a nondescript building, the kind of place where business was done in secrecy, away from the eyes of the public. She took a deep breath and entered. Inside, the office was quiet and sterile, filled with expensive furniture and soft lighting. Kessler was sitting at a desk, his back turned as he stared out the window. When he heard Naomi enter, he stood and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low. "What you're about to hear will change everything." Naomi nodded, her pulse quickening. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew she wasn't going to leave this office until she had answers. Kessler gestured for her to sit, and she did, her eyes fixed on him as he took a seat across from her. "I'm sure you're wondering why all of this matters," Kessler began. "Why your father's actions, why my debt to him, why any of this should concern you. The truth is, it's not just about money or power. It's about something deeper, something more significant." Naomi leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in anticipation. "What do you mean?" she asked. Kessler's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Naomi saw a flicker of vulnerability. "Your father saved my life, yes. But it wasn't just me. He helped countless people, some of whom are still out there today. His actions set off a chain reaction, one that has reverberated through the years. And now, it's your turn to step into the role he left behind." Naomi blinked, her confusion deepening. "My turn," she repeated. "What do you mean by that?" Kessler leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "I know this is hard to understand, but your father wasn't just a man of integrity. He was a man who understood the bigger picture. He understood that sometimes you have to make sacrifices to change the course of history. And now, it's your turn to carry that legacy forward." Naomi's mind was spinning. What could she possibly do with this kind of information? How could she, a young woman who had spent most of her life working to make ends meet, possibly follow in her father's footsteps? "I don't understand," she whispered. "What legacy are you talking about?" Kessler's eyes held hers. "Your father didn't just save me from financial ruin. He saved a future that's now in your hands. There are people, Naomi, who would do anything to see this legacy erased, to see your father's sacrifices mean nothing. But you have the power to protect it, to honor it." Naomi swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in. This wasn't just about money, about paying a debt. It was about something far bigger, something that she was now responsible for. She couldn't run from it. "What do I have to do?" she asked quietly. Kessler smiled slightly, his expression a mixture of respect and something else Naomi couldn't quite place. "The first thing you need to do," he said, "is understand that your life is about to change in ways you can't predict. But if you're ready, if you're truly ready to step up, I'll show you the way." Naomi took a deep breath, the enormity of the situation finally sinking in. There was no turning back now. She had already made her choice. She was going to find out the truth, no matter where it led. And whatever legacy her father had left behind, she would carry it forward. Naomi sat in the dimly lit office, the weight of Richard Kessler's words pressing on her chest. The last hour had been a whirlwind of revelation, secrets, and unsettling truths. Her father, a man she had always seen as simple, humble, had been part of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. And now, she was supposed to pick up where he left off? Her mind was racing as she tried to make sense of the tangled web of connections and debts that had led her here. Kessler's face, usually so composed and confident, was now filled with something else, something Naomi hadn't seen before: concern. "Naomi," Kessler began, his voice softer than usual, "I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to understand that this is bigger than just your father's legacy. It's about preserving something important." Naomi blinked, struggling to focus. What do you mean by preserving something important? She asked, her voice shaky but determined. Kessler leaned forward, his eyes intense. There are people out there who would stop at nothing to erase what your father did. What he started. But you have the power to protect it. To keep it alive. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. What are you asking me to do? She whispered. Kessler's gaze hardened. I'm not asking you to take over your father's business. I'm not asking you to get involved in anything illegal or dangerous. But your father, he made sure that certain things didn't fall into the wrong hands. Now, that responsibility falls to you. Naomi's stomach twisted. She didn't want any part of this, but something inside her told her she had no choice. Who are these people? Why do they want to erase my father's legacy? She demanded, her voice growing stronger. Kessler took a deep breath, as if considering how much to reveal. Your father was a man of honor, but he had enemies. Powerful enemies. The kind of people who will do anything to protect their interests, even if it means wiping out everything your father worked for. But your father left a plan, a way to protect what he built, a way for you to carry that torch forward. Naomi shook her head, trying to process the enormity of what he was saying. I don't understand. How could my father be involved in something so dangerous? Kessler's expression softened for a moment. Your father wasn't involved in anything dangerous. But sometimes, doing the right thing means making powerful enemies. And when you protect the truth, when you protect the people who matter, you put yourself in the line of fire. That's what he did, Naomi. And that's what you'll have to do now. Naomi's heart was racing. Her father's quiet, ordinary life had just been revealed to be part of something far more complex. And now she was the one who would have to carry the burden. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for this responsibility. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice breaking. Kessler stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. The sky was darkening, the streetlights flickering to life as night fell. You don't have to do it alone, he said, his voice low. There are people who will help you. People who owe your father a debt, just like I do. And they'll stand with you, just as your father stood with me. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision settling in. She had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, doing the hard work without ever asking for recognition. But now, it seemed like the time had come for her to step into the light, to take on a role she had never imagined. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice firm, her fear pushing her forward. Kessler turned to face her, his expression resolute. The first step is understanding what your father left behind. You need to see what he was protecting and why it matters. I'll help you, Naomi, but you have to trust me. Naomi stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she could trust Kessler, or if she could trust herself to take on this monumental task. But there was no turning back now. Where do we start? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Kessler smiled, his eyes gleaming with approval. We start by uncovering the truth, Naomi. We start by protecting what your father left behind. And we make sure that nothing, and no one, can destroy it. Naomi nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a waitress, no longer just the daughter of a man who had lived quietly in the shadows. She was about to step into a world of power, secrets, and danger. And no matter what happened, she would honor her father's legacy, no matter the cost. Naomi stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The streets of New Orleans had never seemed so foreign to her. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her father, was changing. Richard Kessler had promised her the truth, and she was now part of a world she never thought she would be involved in. A world of power, secrets, and debts to be repaid. The weight of what she had learned was heavy on her shoulders. But there was no turning back. As she thought back to the conversation she had with Kessler earlier, Naomi realized the full extent of her father's hidden life. Kessler had made it clear that her father had been protecting something vital, something worth more than money, something that could change the course of everything. She had no idea what that something was, but she had to find out. She couldn't let this go. Naomi glanced at the clock on the wall. It was late, but she knew what she had to do. She had to start the search now, before it was too late. Kessler had told her there were people who owed her father a debt, people who could help her uncover the truth. But where would she even begin? As if on cue, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Kessler. Meet me tomorrow. I'll show you where to start. Naomi's pulse quickened. She knew tomorrow would be the beginning of everything. She couldn't waste any more time. She had to learn what her father had been involved in, and what legacy she was meant to carry forward. The next morning, Naomi met Kessler at a small cafe in the heart of the city. He was already there, sitting at a table by the window, a folder in front of him. Naomi walked over and sat down, her heart racing. "What is this all about?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Kessler opened the folder and slid it across the table toward her. "This," he said, "is the first piece of the puzzle. It's everything your father kept hidden, everything he was protecting." Naomi opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents inside. There were pictures, files, and what looked like legal papers. But the one thing that caught her eye was a name, Ethan Monroe. The name was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "Who is Ethan Monroe?" she asked, looking up at Kessler. "He's someone your father helped," Kessler replied. "But he's also someone who could help you. He's the key to understanding the full story." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard that name before, but the connection wasn't clear. "Where can I find him?" she asked. Kessler leaned forward, his expression serious. "That's the next step. Ethan's been hiding for years, but I know where he is. I'll take you to him." Naomi nodded, her mind racing. She was finally on the path to uncovering the truth. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't do this alone. She had already lost so much. This was her chance to reclaim her father's legacy, to honor him in a way she never thought possible. That afternoon, they drove out of the city, heading toward a remote location that Kessler had mentioned. The road was quiet, the trees lining the sides of the highway casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. Naomi's thoughts were a blur. She had so many questions about her father, about Ethan Monroe, about the people who would stop at nothing to erase everything her father had built. As they approached their destination, Naomi felt a sense of unease. The area was isolated, with no signs of life for miles. It felt like the kind of place where secrets were buried, where the truth could be hidden forever. Kessler stopped the car in front of an old, decrepit building. "This is it," he said, his voice low. Naomi took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, her legs trembling slightly. She didn't know what she would find inside, but she knew she had to face it. They walked into the building, the door creaking as it opened. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps. Kessler led her to a small room in the back, where a man sat hunched over a desk. He looked up as they entered, his face a mix of surprise and recognition. "You must be Naomi," he said, his voice raspy. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. "You're Ethan Monroe," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He stood up slowly, his eyes studying her. "Your father was a good man," he said quietly. "A man who made sure I could survive, even when everything seemed lost." Naomi felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Ethan Monroe was real. He was someone who owed her father a debt, someone who could help her understand everything. But as she looked at him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What had her father been involved in? And what was Ethan Monroe going to tell her? "What do you know about my father?" she asked, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "I know more than I should," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "Your father saved my life. And now, I'm here to tell you how it all happened. The debt he owed, and the truth behind it." Naomi took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The truth was within her reach, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. She had to know what her father had been protecting, and what her role in this story would be. The answers were finally within grasp, and nothing, not even the danger that lurked in the shadows, would stop her from finding them. Naomi sat in the dim light of the abandoned building, her heart racing as she stared at Ethan Monroe. The weight of everything she had learned in the past few days was finally crashing down on her. Her father, the man she had always thought was ordinary, had been at the center of a complex web of secrets and debts. The truth about her father's legacy was unfolding before her eyes, and she knew she couldn't walk away now. Ethan leaned forward, his hands resting on the table as he studied her. "I know this is a lot to process," he said softly. "But your father was a man who understood the importance of protecting something greater than himself. What he did for me, what he did for Richard Kessler, it wasn't just about saving lives or money. It was about saving futures, about protecting people who were too blinded by their own power to see the truth. Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. The man she had always known as a quiet mechanic, a man who kept to himself, had been involved in something so much bigger than she could ever have imagined. But why didn't he tell me? Naomi whispered, her voice shaking. Why didn't he tell me any of this? Ethan sighed, his expression softening. Your father wasn't a man who wanted recognition. He did what he did out of duty, out of honor. He never wanted you to carry the burden of his actions. He wanted you to have a normal life, free from the complications that came with the decisions he made. Naomi wiped a tear from her cheek. I don't know if I can carry that burden, Ethan, she admitted. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Ethan looked at her with understanding. You don't have to do it alone. There are people who will help you. People who owe your father a debt just like I do. You're not alone in this. And you have the strength of your father inside you. You just need to accept it. Naomi looked at the documents in front of her, her father's legacy spread out before her. She had always believed that the truth about her father's life was a simple one, but now she saw how wrong she had been. The truth was messy, complicated, and far more dangerous than she could have imagined. But as she looked at Ethan, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't walk away. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. I'm ready to honor my father's legacy. I'm ready to do what it takes to protect it. Ethan smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. That's the first step, he said. Now, we can move forward. There's much more to be done, Naomi. But I promise you, we'll do this together. They stood up, and as they walked toward the door, Naomi felt a sense of determination settle within her. The truth was out there, and it was hers to uncover. There was still so much she didn't know, so much more to learn, but she knew she was ready. And with Ethan by her side, she would face whatever came next. As they stepped out into the fading light of the afternoon, Naomi felt the weight of her father's legacy settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was the protector of his secrets, the one who would carry forward the legacy he had worked so hard to build. The storm was far from over, but Naomi was no longer afraid. She had found her purpose, and she would stop at nothing to see it through. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. She had to be. For her father, for the future, for herself.